Book of Heaven, Volume 3, Part 5. January 31st, 1900. Grace and correspondence to it. After he came quite a few times, but always in silence, I felt a void and a pain, for I could not hear the most sweet voice of my sweet Jesus. And he, coming back almost to content me, told me, "Grace is the life of the soul. Just as the soul gives life to the body, so does grace give life to the soul. However, in order to have life, it is not enough for the body to have the soul. It also needs food with which to nourish itself and grow to the proper stature. In the same way, it is not enough for the soul to have grace in order to have life, but food is needed to nourish her and raise her to the proper stature. And what is this food? It is correspondence. So grace and correspondence to it form the links of the chain which lead her to heaven. And in so far as the soul corresponds to grace, so does she keep forming the links of this chain." Then he added, "What is the passport to enter into the kingdom of grace? It is humility. The soul, by always looking at her nothingness, and seeing that she is nothing but dust and wind, will place all her trust in grace, so much so as to make of it her master. And grace, taking dominion over all of the soul, leads her along the path of all virtues, and makes her reach the summit of perfection. What would a soul without grace be like? It seems to me that she would be like the body without the soul, which becomes stinking and spews worms and rot from all parts, so much so as to become an object of horror to the very human sight. In the same way, without grace, the soul becomes so abominable as to be horrifying to the sight, not of men, but of God thrice holy. Ah, Lord, free me from such misfortune, and from the abominable monster of sin." February 14th, 1900. Lack of confidence. As I was in a state full of discouragement, especially because of the privation of my highest good, this morning, making himself seen for just a little, he told me, "Discouragement is an infectious humor, which infects the most beautiful flowers and the most pleasant fruits, and penetrates down to the bottom of the root, in such a way that, by invading the whole tree, that infectious humor renders it withered and squalid. And if one does not remedy it by watering it with a contrary humor, since the bad humor has infiltrated deep into the root, it will make the root wither, and the tree fall to the ground. So it happens to the soul, who becomes soaked with this infectious humor of discouragement. In spite of all this, I still felt discouraged, all huddled within myself, and I saw myself as so bad that I did not dare to fling myself toward my sweet Jesus. My mind was occupied with the thought that it was useless for me to hope for his continuous visits as before, for his graces, for his charisms. Everything was over for me. And he, almost scolding me, added, What are you doing? What are you doing? Don't you know that the lack of confidence renders the soul moribund? Thinking that she has to die, she no longer thinks of anything, neither of gaining anything, nor of making it circulate, nor of embellishing herself more, nor of remedying her ailments. She thinks of nothing else but that everything is over for her. And not only does discouragement render the soul moribund, but it renders all virtues close to expiring. Ah, Lord, I imagine seeing this spectre of the lack of confidence, squalid, emaciated, fearful, and all trembling, and all of his mastery, with no other ingenuity but fear alone, leads souls to the tomb. But what is more, this spectre does not show himself as an enemy, such that the soul can sneer at his fear, but he shows himself as a friend, and he infiltrates so sweetly into the soul that if the soul is not attentive, seeing him as a faithful friend who agonizes with her and even dies together with her, she will hardly be able to free herself of his artificious mastery. February 5th, 1900. The Circle of Truth. Continuing in the same state, with a little bit more courage, though I was not perfectly free, my dearest Jesus on coming told me, "My daughter, at times the soul feels an encounter in some virtue, and plucking up her strength, the soul overcomes that encounter. Then that virtue becomes more resplendent and rooted in the soul. However, the soul must be very attentive in order to avoid that she herself might provide the little rope to let herself be bound by lack of confidence. And she will do this by always restricting herself, without ever getting out of the circle of truth, which is the knowledge of her nothingness." February 12th, 1900. Voluntary defects form clouds. As I was in a state of abandonment on the part of my adorable Jesus, I felt my poor heart crushed by the pain, as though under a press. Oh God, what an unutterable pain! While I was in this state, I saw my dear good almost like a shadow, but not clearly. I only saw one hand clearly, which seemed to carry a lamp that was lit. And he dipped his finger in the lamp and anointed the area of my heart, exacerbated to the summit by the pain of his privation. At that moment I heard a voice saying, "The truth is light, which the Word brought upon earth. Just as the sun illuminates, vivifies, and fecundates the earth, so does the light of truth give life and light, and renders souls fecund with virtues. Even though many clouds obfuscate this light of truth, which are the iniquities of men, in spite of this, it does not cease to send forth glimmers of vivifying light from behind the clouds, so as to warm souls. And if these clouds are clouds of imperfection and of involuntary defects, this light, piercing them with its heat, makes them vanish and penetrates freely into the soul. So I comprehended that the soul must be attentive not to fall even into a shadow of voluntary defects, which are those dangerous clouds that prevent the entrance of divine light. February 13th, 1900. Mortification is like lime. This morning, after receiving communion, I saw my adorable Jesus, but completely changed in his appearance. He looked serious, all distant, in act of reproaching me. What a tormenting change! Instead of being relieved, I felt my poor heart more oppressed, more pierced, before such an unusual presence of Jesus. Yet I felt all the need of a relief from the pains of his privations suffered in the past days, which were such that I seemed to live, but agonizing and in a continuous state of violence. But, blessed Jesus, wanting to reproach me because I was looking for relief in his presence, while I was to look for nothing other than suffering, told me, just as lime has the virtue of cooking the objects that are thrown into it, so does mortification have the virtue of cooking all the imperfections and defects that are present in the soul. And it reaches the point of spiritualizing also the body, surrounding it like a circle, and sealing all virtues within it. Until mortification has cooked you well, both the soul and the body, to the point of undoing it, I will not be able to seal in you perfectly the mark of my crucifixion. After this, someone, I can't tell exactly who he was, but he seemed to be an angel, pierced my hands and feet through. And Jesus, with a lance that came out from his heart, pierced mine through to my most utmost pain. Then he disappeared, leaving me more afflicted than before. Oh, how well I comprehended the necessity of mortification, my inseparable friend, and how there was not even a shadow of friendship in me with mortification. Ah, Lord, bind me yourself with indissoluble friendship to this good friend, because on my own I can only show myself all roughness. And she, not seeing herself being welcomed nicely, uses all regards with me, and keeps sparing me, for fear that I might get to the point of turning my back on her completely. So she never accomplishes with me her beautiful and majestic crafting, because as long as we remain a little distant, her prodigious hands cannot reach up to me, in a way as to be able to work me and present me to you as a work worthy of her most holy hands. February 16th, 1900. Mortification must be the breath of the soul. It continues almost always in the same way. This morning, after renewing in me the pains of the crucifixion, he told me, mortification must be the breath of the soul, just as breathing is necessary to the body, and depending on the good or bad air that it breathes, so does it remain infected or purified. And also, from the breathing, it can be known whether the interior of man is healthy or sick, and whether all the vital parts are in accord. The same for the soul. If she breathes the air of mortification, everything in her will be purified. All of her senses will sound with the same concordant sound. Her interior will send out a balsamic, salutary, fortifying breath. But if she does not breathe the air of mortification, everything will be discordant in the soul. She will send out a stinking, disgusting breath. While she is about to tame one passion, another will unbridle. In sum, her life will be nothing but a child's game. I seem to see mortification like a musical instrument. If the strings are all good and strong, it produces a harmonious and pleasant sound. But if the strings are not good, one must now fix one, now tune another. Therefore the whole time is spent fixing, but never playing. At the most, it will produce a discordant and unpleasant sound. So nothing good will ever be accomplished. February 19th, 1900, the century of pride. Jesus wants the hearts of souls all for himself. This morning my adorable Jesus came and transported me outside of myself, and I could see many people, all in motion. I cannot tell with certainty, but there seemed to be a war, or a revolution, and they did nothing but braid crowns of thorns to our Lord, so much so that while I was all intent on removing one, they would drive another one, more painful, onto his head. Ah, yes, it really seemed that this century of ours will be renowned for pride. The great misfortune is to lose one's head, because once the head with the brain is lost, all the other members become disabled, or they become the enemies of oneself and of others. So it happens that the person lets all the other vices break through. My patient Jesus tolerated all those crowns of thorns, and I hardly had the time to remove them. Then he turned to them and said, "You will die, some in war, some in prisons, and some by earthquake. Only few of you will be left. Pride has formed the course of the actions of your lives, and pride will give you death." After this, blessed Jesus pulled me away from the midst of those people, and as he became a baby, I carried him in my arms to let him rest. Asking me for a refreshment, he wanted to suckle from me. Fearing that it might be the devil, I marked him with the cross several times, and then I said to him, "If you really are Jesus, let us recite the Hail Mary to our Queen Mamma together." And Jesus recited the first part, and I the Holy Mary. Then he himself wanted to recite the Our Father. Oh, how touching his praying was! It was so moving that my heart seemed to liquefy. Then afterwards he added, "Daughter, my life I drew from the heart, as opposed to others, and this is one reason why I am all heart for souls, and I am inclined to want the heart, and I tolerate not even a shadow of what is not mine. So between you and me, I want everything distinctly for myself, and what you will concede to creatures will be nothing other than the overflow of our love." February 20th, 1900. Jesus is the lamp of all in heaven. My benign Jesus continues to come. After I had received communion, he renewed in me the pains of the crucifixion, and I was left so numb that I felt a need for a relief, but I did not dare to ask for it. After a little while he came back as a baby, and he kissed me all over. Milk flowed from his lips, and I drank in large gulps that most sweet milk from his most pure lips. Now while I was doing this, he told me, I am the flower of the celestial Eden, and the fragrance I spread is such that at my perfume the whole of heaven remains captivated. And since I am the lamp that sends light to all, so much so as to keep them immersed in it, all of my saints draw their little lights from me. So there is no light in heaven which has not been drawn from this lamp. Ah, yes, there is not even the smell of virtue without Jesus, and there is no light, even if one went up to the highest heavens, without Jesus. February 21st, 1900. Purity is obtained through mortification, and mortification renders the soul worthy of sympathy. This morning my lovable Jesus began to make his usual delays. May he be always blessed, for he always starts all over again. Indeed, it takes the patience of a saint to bear him, and one would have to deal with Jesus to see how much patience it takes. One who has not experienced it cannot believe it, and it is almost impossible not to have a few little huffs with him. Then, after exercising patience in waiting and waiting for him, finally he came and told me, My daughter, the gift of purity is not a natural gift, but an attained grace, and this is obtained by rendering oneself worthy of sympathy. And the soul becomes so through mortifications and through sufferings. Oh, how worthy of sympathy becomes the mortified and suffering soul. Oh, how striking she is. And I feel such sympathy as to go mad for her. And whatever she wants, I give to her. You, when you are deprived of me, suffer my privation for love of me, which is the most painful suffering for you. And I will feel more sympathy than before, and will grant you new gifts. February 23rd, 1900. The sign to know whether a state is will of God. This morning, after I had almost lost the hope that blessed Jesus would come, all of a sudden he came, and renewed in me the pains of the crucifixion. And he told me, The time has come, the end is approaching, but the hour is uncertain. And I, without paying attention to the meaning of the words he spoke, remained in doubt on whether I should attribute them to my complete crucifixion or to the chastisements. So I said to him, Lord, how I fear that my state might not be will of God. And he, The surest sign in order to know whether a state is my will is when one feels the strength to bear that state. And I, If it were your will, this change, that you do not come as before, would not happen. and he. When a person becomes intimate within a family, one no longer uses those formalities, those regards that were used before, when he was a stranger. So I do. But nevertheless, this is not a sign that it is not the will of that family to have that person with them, or that they no longer love him as before. Therefore remain calm. Let me do. Do not want to rack your brains or trouble the peace of your heart. At the appropriate time, you will know my operating. February 24th, 1900. Luisa resists obedience. This morning I was all fear. I believed that everything was fantasy. That is, the devil wanting to deceive me. So whatever I would see, I despised, and I was displeased. I saw the confessor placing the intention that Jesus would renew in me the pains of the crucifixion, and I tried to resist. At first, blessed Jesus tolerated me, but since the confessor kept repeating the intention, Jesus then told me, "My daughter, this time we are really going to fail the obedience. Don't you know that obedience must seal the soul, and that obedience must render the soul like soft wax, in such a way that the confessor can give to it the shape he wants?" So heedless of my resistances, he shared with me the pains of the crucifixion. And I, no longer able to resist all this, which I did not want for fear that it might not be Jesus, was forced to succumb under the weight of the pains. May he be always blessed, and may everything be to glorify him, in everything and always. February 26, 1900. The divine will is the beatitude of all. After going through several days of privation, at most he came a few times like a shadow, and he ran away. I felt such pain that I consumed myself with tears. Having compassion for my sorrow, blessed Jesus came, and he looked and looked at me again. And then he said to me, "My daughter, do not fear, for I do not leave you. However, when you are without my presence, I do not want you to lose heart, but rather, from today on, when you are without me, I want you to take my will and to delight in it, loving me and glorifying me in my will, and holding my will as if it were my very person. By doing so, you will hold me in your own hands." What forms the beatitude of paradise? Certainly my divinity. Now, what would form the beatitude of my dear ones on earth? With certainty, my will. My will can never escape you. You will always have it in your possession. And if you remain in the circle of my will, there you will experience the joys most ineffable and the pleasures most pure. By never going out of the circle of my will, the soul becomes noble, divinized, and all of her operations reverberate in the center of the divine sun, just as the sun's rays reverberate on the surface of the earth. Not one of them goes out of their center, which is God. The soul who does my will is alone the noble queen who nourishes herself from my breath, because she takes her food and her drink from no place but my will. And by nourishing herself of my will all holy, a most pure blood will flow in her veins, and her breath will spread a fragrant perfume, which will cheer the whole of me, because it is produced by my very breath. Therefore I want nothing else from you but that you form your beatitude in the circle of my will, without ever going out of it, not even for a brief instant. While he was saying this, I felt an alarm and a fear in my interior, that the speaking of Jesus might indicate that he was not going to come, and that I was supposed to calm myself in his will. Oh God, what a mortal pain! How it gripped my heart! But Jesus, always benign, added, "How can I leave you, since you are victim? When you cease to be victim, only then will I not come. But as long as you are victim, I will always feel drawn to come." So it seems I have remained calm, but I feel as though surrounded by the adorable will of God, in such a way that I find no opening through which to go out. I hope he will always keep me in this circle that connects me completely in God. You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 3, Part 5. Fiat.